I was a coach while I worked full-time for several years and then transitioned in the corporate space to coaching full-time and then full-time on my own. We can get in our own way too by thinking it has to be all or nothing, or it has to be immediate, acknowledging the emotions, but understanding that they come and go and we are not a victim or a slave to them. We don't want to then call our boss in the midst of that. It's less fruitful. You're talking to yourself and you're saying those shoulds. Really ask yourself, do I actually want to do it? Doing a little bit of journaling or verbal processing or unpacking can help you get more to the root and really decide if it makes sense.
This is the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast, where we are here to educate, equip, and inspire people to build extraordinary companies. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can get updates every time we drop a new episode. Now let's get it started. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. My name is Rick Meekins, and I am going to be your host today. And in our studio, we have Alyssa Gioscia. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. I'm super excited. It's going to be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. Alyssa is a coach, and she's that coach that you always wish that you had, that would just kick you in your butt, doesn't apologize, and makes you keep pushing forward. So this is what we're dealing with today, folks. So anyway, before we get started, I would ask kindly that you might like, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you get notified every time we drop a new episode. So now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Alyssa, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi. So Alyssa Gioscia, as we have established, I'm an executive coach. I focus on leadership and performance, but I also try to look very holistically at the life of my clients, because as somebody who has focused only on performance, it can get really exhausting if you're not looking at all of your values and what you're trying to do in life holistically and the whys behind it. And what you said is true. I will be fairly unrelenting in making sure you hit your goals, and also doing that with empathy and love, because otherwise, what are we doing?
Yep, absolutely. So you weren't always in coaching. Can you talk to us about your transition from corporate into coaching, why you did it, and all that good stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I was in the tech space, and a friend of mine who's a coach reached out to me and was asking some questions about my job. And I realized the job that I was doing wasn't really my dream job. I just happened to like it and be good at it. So I had a lot of success in my role. But as I looked back and thought about like what my dream job really would be, I saw that a lot of my jobs had included training and mentorship and some level of coaching, or learning how to say the same thing multiple times to different audiences to help with training and how do you utilize software and things of that nature. So I was like, I've actually been doing this for a while, and I loved the results of coaching in my own life. And I thought, I really want to be able to share this with other people. So I decided to get certified, and I was in corporate and transitioned into coaching. And then in January 23, went out on my own and have been out of corporate for a variety of reasons, but one of them being just health issues and not wanting to be in that environment anymore, because again, it kind of wasn't really in alignment with my values. So now I just get to coach.
I love that. So in our episode, what is the most important thing you want our audience to get out of it?
Well, since we're talking about things that might be holding you back, hopefully either recognizing or even removing some of the things that are holding you back would be a great tip, tool, trick, whatever you want to call it, to leave with here today.
I love it. Cool. I keep thinking one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that in-between space. So you went through it, you said, hey, I want to be a coach. And it wasn't like you just flipped a light switch and all of a sudden you were coaching and you had clients and you didn't know what to do with all the money that you were bringing.
It didn't start like that.
I imagine for folks that you've worked with, they go through that transition. And I know that space is kind of scary. I know for me, even it's like moving in from nothing but consulting to doing podcasting and speaking, all that good stuff. That transition space is kind of scary. How do you get people, to take that first step to say, okay, this is something I want to do in my life, to actually going into it and then really navigating through it so that, hey, it was cooler back when I was getting a paycheck every week. I'm having a breakdown.
Yeah. I mean, even for myself, a lot of it is realigning with what you actually want in life now, and then having what I would say is like a clear lighthouse to what you're doing so that you can always refer back to that. It makes it easier to say yes or no to things and to stay the course when it feels really scary, and being okay with the differences in it. Like I had to really drill down and say like, okay, my salary that I was just getting for doing my job automatically, it was like, you got hired, we pay you this. was not going to be what it was like on my own, and deciding if the adjustment or the discomfort, however temporary it might be, or it might go on for a little while, mine was a little longer than temporary, is worth the change. For me, it was, because I felt like I was aligned value-wise, but you have to be willing to look at all those things and decide, is this really what I want? And am I okay with it? And look at the repercussions of it, right? Like if you are your breadwinner, you're probably not just going to quit your job and do something else. Maybe you're doing two things at once until one is enough and you can kind of transition out.
Yeah.
So really, and being clear on like, what do you need to live? What are your expectations? What discomfort level are you okay with? And we don't try to do it all at once.
Right.
Like I was a coach while I worked full time for several years, and then transitioned in the corporate space to coaching full time and then full time on my own. So I didn't just dive in. And, we can get in our own way too by thinking it has to be all or nothing, or it has to be immediate, or even the idea of like, well, if you love it, just make it your job. That's not for everybody. And it doesn't always work. Like I love makeup. I don't want to do it as a job. I just want to have the lifestyle that allows me to buy it if I want it, so you kind of have to look at the why behind it and realistically look at what you can expect from from what the road might look like.
Yeah. You said you had a couple things that I want to touch back on. One of the things you mentioned really briefly was just being able to say yes and no, to certain things. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're struggling with people pleasing, especially, you're saying yes to everything. But hopefully as you kind of evolve through that, which I think we all kind of struggle with that to some extent, but oftentimes we'll say yes because something sounds fun or it sounds good or it sounds interesting or we want to help. But if we know for sure that there's a direction that we want to go in, we have to evaluate if saying yes is going to move us closer or further away from that. And there are always things, of course, with family and friends or whatever it might be, where you say yes and it doesn't necessarily do that. But you're technically generally going to find, at least my experience, that you're saying no to more things than saying yes to. That's why it's important to have that lighthouse. Because like if you say you want to work out and okay, you want to work out 3 days a week and you want to lose a certain amount of weight, but you're constantly saying yes to going out to eat. This is a very light example. It may be counter to the goals that you're trying to accomplish around your fitness.
Right.
So if you can say, okay, well, I really said that I wanted my fitness goals to be this, whether it's losing weight or gaining weight, whatever you're trying to do, does that still feed into that? And so it can make it easier, but it can be really hard for people to say no, especially if you're used to saying yes.
Yeah. Is there one thing that comes to mind about that in particular is guardrails? Is that something that you talk about?
Yes. And also like slowing down. One of the first things I'll say to clients is just don't say yes or no immediately. If somebody's like, all expenses paid trip, probably say yes to that right away. But on the basic side, we can default to just saying yes rather than let me get back to you in a couple of hours and really thinking about it. Just that slowdown can help a lot. And sometimes you have to practice in small things because people are so uncomfortable saying no.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The other thing that popped out to me, you said a couple of times, was related to values. And I want to get your feel for how important that alignment is with your work.
Well, for me, it was everything. And even when I started out my coaching practice, there's a lot of expertise out there on what your practice should look like. And I put some of those things into place, but they weren't really in alignment with me or the types of clients I wanted or how I wanted to build my business. So I had to take a pretty deep look at how I wanted my business to grow and decide, even if some of these things feel counter or it's not what everyone is doing or saying you should do, quote on the word should, what's going to really work for me? Because a lot of times we're doing things that like our parents told us to do, and we still have just kind of taken that with us. Or, well, everybody expects me to show up in this way, or what would people think if? And so it's very external. So it's important to look at like, hey, why do you want that promotion? Or why do you want that raise? And, oh, by the way, you said your kids have now left the house. And so you want your life to look like this. Does that promotion actually equal that? Because sometimes maybe the additional hours are going to be counter to what you're saying you want in your personal life. So trying to balance those things is important. But a lot of us can get out of that authentic place where we're like really living in our integrity. This is everybody, where we're saying yes or no, but we don't really mean it. And then we're like, why am I having a little bit of resentment or physical pain or whatever it is because you're talking about things or doing things in a way that's not really what you want. So a lot of work I do with clients too is looking at like, are you avoiding things? Are you complaining about things? Because sometimes there's a vision underneath that. for what you really do want, but you haven't been able to bring it to fruition yet.
Yeah. Wow. You went so deep there. I love that. How do we define or how do we determine these, what our values could be? I mean, you talked about the idea that sometimes we have a framework or obstacles perhaps that, other people define for us, our family, the way we grew up, whatever that was, versus what's authentically us. So how do we go through, or what process is used to really dig down deep and really figure out what's most important to me, and perhaps even, what I'm going to be looking for in 3 to 5 years, or, whatever down the road?
That's a great question, Rick. I do different things with clients. One is looking at the things that are giving us energy that we really enjoy, and how do we get more of that, and what is sucking our energy. And sometimes it's really skewed where it's like most of what I'm doing is exhausting to me and I don't like it. And there's a difference, especially in coaching. Like if my coach challenges me to something, I might get some resistance because it's out of my comfort zone. That's different than just doing things that are actually making you miserable. So kind of discerning those two. Also looking at, if I could wave a magic wand and change my life right now, would I change everything? Would I just make minor tweaks? Sometimes also we haven't really looked at it, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm just doing what I've always done. Well, what worked when I was 25 may not work when I'm 35 or 45, but it's just the way that I've done it. So we don't think we can change. And then we have mindset things like, well, if I just stick it out, or if I just wait long enough, or hopefully it will happen eventually. So we kind of have these things that we'll tell ourselves, hopefully happen eventually, is the same thing you've been saying for the last year, and nothing has changed. So why are we still living in that? And especially, depending on your generation too, it might be, well, you got to stick it out. That's what we do. We stick it out. Well, maybe, or maybe we don't. And sometimes it's big changes and sometimes it's not. Like sometimes it's like, well, I have to leave my job and start a business. Not necessarily. Maybe you just need to delegate some things. So it's also kind of looking at all of those pieces together of like, what's working, what's not working, what do I like, what do I not like, and seeing where we can adjust.
So that's interesting. A lot of times, part of what's played into me is that sacrifice, whether it's, sacrificing for my team or sacrificing for my family, or whatever it is. And that is really deeply ingrained. And I think that for me in particular, it was at one point more of a blocker in terms of taking certain risks or, going in a certain direction. How would you coach me to really get out of my own way at this point?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, what are you sacrificing and why, right? Like if you're saying, okay, I want to work 50 hours a week for the next 2 years because I'm trying to buy my family a new house, that might be totally worth it. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily that we stop doing that, but maybe we make some changes so that you don't lose, let's say, family time while you're working those extra hours. But if the underlying behind it is, I'm not really sure, or I don't know anymore, then we need to figure out, okay, then why are you doing this? And I don't always look at the why, also because sometimes the why is like, something happened with my mom when I was 9. That doesn't matter. But is what we're doing now going to move us to where we want to be? Does what we have in place still make sense? And if it doesn't, let's change it.
So sometimes there are those whys that, perhaps we grew up with or whatever. How do we really bury that so that doesn't become something that is a blocker, is something that slow our ability to move forward down?
Yeah, we can't go back and change those things. So, I mean, of course, therapy is helpful if you do want to go back. It's not a bad thing. A lot of my clients are doing therapy and coaching in tandem, but it can just be simply about like, okay, because of whatever, this is how I'm doing things now. And it's giving me result. And if I no longer want result A, then I simply need to change the behaviors. It could be one behavior, it could be a bunch. So it might not be simply, but that's like the baseline of it. So if the behaviors that I'm doing are getting a result that I don't want, then I need different behaviors. What do I want to change so that I can get a different result? And not looking at things super black and white. Like a lot of times we'll be like, oh, well, that thing's not working, so everything's just blown up. No, maybe we just need to make minor tweaks, especially at a certain point. It's like dial. I tell my clients a lot of times dial clicks, just like one little thing, but it can have a big impact.
Yeah. Reminds me of strategy work that I do where it's like, we go in, we put it in a new software and that's okay, cool. We got the software, but getting people to use it every day, like you said, like small things, small clicks on the dial to make that happen.
Yes,
I love that.
We love change so much. Everyone loves change.
The idea of change.
Yeah. And clients too, a lot of times they'll tell me they're feeling overwhelmed because now you have a list of 50 things, right? Like now I have to learn this software and it changes how I'm going to do this and it changes how I'm going to do that and all this stuff. let's look at the one thing. What's the next thing we have to do? So I always tell clients, like, you might see that there's all these steps going up, but we're just looking at the one or two in front of us, because a step is easy. Sending one email is easy. Making a phone call, writing the first 2 paragraphs, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the entire book. Just write for 20 minutes. Yeah. What's the smaller chunk that you can do? It makes it a lot more manageable, because it's like when people haven't been to the gym and they're like, I'm going to the gym every day, and then they wonder why they burn out. It's too much too soon. It's not realistic. So what's the realistic version of how to get there?
I like that. I was thinking about, you alluded to tasks and task management. One of the other things that I see a lot of times with a lot of folks is, they've got these to-do lists that are 100 items long, and they're growing, and everything is due today.
Yeah.
And they're wondering why they're experiencing anxiety and that sort of thing. How do you work with folks like that?
It's things like using an Eisenhower model or something of that nature, of what on this list is actually important and needs to be done right away. And like, what's on the list because you think you should do it and it's giving you anxiety, but you don't really want to do it. It doesn't really need to be on the list, or it's not really an emergency. And that all goes back to the why, or the lighthouse, of saying, is this moving you forward towards that thing? Because if it's not, just drop it. Or sometimes it's as simple as like, you're avoiding something that would take 20 minutes to do. And if you would just do it, you could cross it off the list, get it out of your brain, and be done. So why are we avoiding it? It's just asking questions around those types of things. And in that instance, why is this on the list at all?
Yeah, I've got things on the list. It's like, I hate doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we all have to do things we don't like, but are there things you can delegate? Are there things you can pay somebody to do? Like, sometimes the $20 would be worth letting somebody else come and do whatever thing.
Yeah.
You know, who knows? I have tried to shorten my list as much as possible. And what's really moving me forward in a way that feels good to me and isn't a bunch of stuff that somebody else told me I should do, or that I'm telling myself I should do. I think that's a big thing too. What language around yourself are you saying around this task?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have to do that. Yeah. Do you have to? You've been avoiding it for weeks. How important is it? I don't know.
That could happen, certainly. I like you keep going back to the lighthouse and moving forward and getting the things out of your way, essentially, that aren't moving you forward. What are the biggest or most obvious things you're seeing with executives, professionals, that are really keeping them from moving forward in whatever context?
Yeah, a lot of it is mindset and the stories that we tell ourselves about why we can or can't do something, or why we can or can't delegate or fix something, because if you're stuck in, I don't want to say excuses, but excuses, that can make it hard. The other thing I think is language. So a lot of times we think that it's either 100% good or 100% bad. And so we don't really want to admit that it's not quite right. Because if we say it's not quite right, which means it's not 100%, then it's all wrong. And that's not the case. So really being honest and clear, and working with someone like you who can help illuminate things, or someone like me who's asking maybe some of those deeper questions, to say, hey, 80% of this is working. And like, that's fine. The 20% that's not working, though, let's actually realistically, honestly look at it and see what needs to be adjusted. Especially if you're the CEO or your business and there's like a personal attachment to it, it can feel that somehow it has some bearing on you if it's not all working perfectly. But we all need help. We all need guidance, support, all those things. So looking at the parts that aren't working right is helpful. And you and I were actually talking about this the other day. If you're driving a car with 3 wheels at 20 miles an hour, it might be okay, but you can't go 60. You do have to stop and fix that thing. And if you fix that one thing, it's not going to lead to a bunch of other problems that are also coming up. So that can be a roadblock too, is like not wanting to look at the couple of things because we feel like it means everything is a failure. It's not the case.
Yeah. I guess really being able to talk through that and getting, that external perspective is really key, because I know with me, sometimes I just can't see. I can't see the forest because the trees are in the way.
Well, and sometimes it's silly stuff. Like, I even called a friend and I was like, I don't know what to do about this one thing. And she was like, well, why don't you call them and see if you can get some guidance? And I was like, I have literally had 2 other similar situations where I have called, but on this one, didn't even occur to me. Makes no sense because I did it before, but sometimes you really do need that outside perspective. And, the other thing too, I'll use the gym analogy again. Like, let's say as your friend, you tell me, I'm going to start working out. I'm going to go to the gym 3 days a week. And next week I say, hey, how was the gym? And you say, great. I went twice. Great. Good job. how was it? I'm your friend. That's all I'm going to say. But as your coach, it's like, hey, well, you said 3, what happened? And so there is that accountability too that doesn't happen in friend settings in the same way it can happen in a setting where somebody's like truly coming in to support you. And even if I challenge a client, it's done in love. And because sometimes I have to be more focused on their goal than they are, because we have emotions and we're humans and we want to procrastinate or let ourselves off the hook or whatever it is.
Yeah. Do you feel like most people need a coach, or everybody? What are your thoughts on that and why?
I mean, I want to say everybody, but it's not for everybody because not everybody wants that level of accountability. Not everybody wants to take that kind of action. It also depends on your type of coach, right? Some people might want a softer approach. Some people might want a more direct approach. So probably, yes, coaching could help everybody, just like therapy could help everybody, but not everybody's going to do it. But I think if you're trying to accomplish things, and a lot of people can say like, oh, I can just do it myself. But you have that 100-point list and you haven't done it yourself. So the likelihood is that you won't. There's a smaller group of people who like really see that and take action. And I think it's nice having the accountability and the partnership of it. I have multiple coaches I work with for different things, depending on where I am in life. That additional perspective is really helpful.
Fantastic. How does one go about finding the right coach?
Well, I think listening to things like this is helpful because, for example, if you listen to this podcast, you might say, oh, I really like her style, or she seemed like she would be a little too much for me, or whatever it might be, right? It's very relational. So a great way is through referrals because you'll know somebody has worked with that coach before and can tell you a little bit about their style, hearing somebody on a podcast and liking how they frame something or the questions that they ask. And then like I always do intro calls with clients to see, hey, am I the right fit for you? Are you the right fit for me? But now we've had a call and I know what you're looking for. I probably have someone in my network I can refer you to. But I think it's nice to, if you can know something about them and see a little bit how they have interacted or know someone who's worked with them and seen that they've gotten results that they were happy with through coaching.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think sometimes we have those rose-colored glasses, meet somebody we like, their personality or, whatever it is, and jump into that relationship. Maybe there's some way to be able to say at some point, it's like, hey, this isn't the right coach for me. I like him as a person, but I'm not getting fed the way that I need to.
Yes. And I've had people too where it's like, hey, you're premature for me. Let me refer you to this coach because that coach is a career coach who's going to work on, let's say, negotiating salary at a new job, resume, and interview prep, which I don't do. But once you get the new job and you've been there for a few weeks and you're ready to like look at confidence and how do I get established and all those things, then come to me and we'll talk. So sometimes it can be that. I like doing 3 coaching calls with a new client. So we'll do 3 calls over whatever period of time they want to do it. And then if they're like, okay, I'm seeing the results, we're getting along, I like what I see, then let's go into maybe a longer contract. That makes it easier to get a feel for one another and then have just the open conversation of like, yeah, I'm liking this. This is really helpful. Or I'm not sure if I want to continue. Okay, well, you've got a really good vision that we've fleshed out. I don't want you to lose that, but let's see if there's somebody else who might support you. Because it's very relational. It's very personality driven. It's kind of like you go into a room and you're like, that person, maybe if I never saw them again, I wouldn't really mind. Most of these people I'm neutral about, that person's my new best friend. You just don't know. And so it gives you a little time to figure it out.
Interesting. What was the most complex coaching engagement you've had? If I were looking at some area of my life where I felt stuck or I felt like I could just do better, I would say, hey, Alyssa, I need help with this thing. And you would work with me and somehow magically he'd fix
By
me
your
in like
efforts,
2 weeks
not magically.
with no work on my part whatsoever.
That's right. It really depends on the client. I've had clients who come to me and they're like, I am ready to quit my job tomorrow and everything is exploding right now. Let's backtrack. Let's get off the ledge a little bit and kind of like find a baseline. If it's a really bad environment, okay, how quickly can we move you on? But it's really going deep and assessing what's happening and trying to sometimes just understand like the emotions are running high, but what's going on under there. Because if you're the sole breadwinner, you can't just quit your job tomorrow. That could be really disastrous long-term effects. So maybe you don't want to do that. But what happened at work? Why are we wanting to quit right now? Like what's going on? Okay, well, I'm overwhelmed. Okay, well, how do we deal with that? So it really depends on what's going on for the person and what's most eminent for them. A lot of times initial calls, if it's not an emergency situation, are I call it weed pulling. It's like getting some of the little stuff out of the way so we can really get down to what's going on, what you really want to do. And yeah, going from there.
Yeah. I guess the emotional part of that's got to be really difficult for people to work through just so that you can work with them. I mean,
Yeah, I
does it
think,
get to the point where the emotions are running so deep, it makes it take longer, or you have to say, hey, you need to go talk to a therapist, or how does that work?
yeah, it depends on what it is. So I actually at times have done grief work with clients because that's a part of my journey, just personally and as a coach. And so if somebody's dealing with, could be a death or a loss, it could be some really strong unmet expectations. Like maybe I thought I was up for this promotion and I was being told I was, and then I didn't get it. And now I'm just really upset and like ragey. I'm like, okay, let's deal with that before we quit the job. Because you might find that if we can address what's going on there and you can have some unfueled by emotion conversations, not that we ignore the emotions, but we don't want to just go charging in with them, then we can talk about it and figure out a different way to go forward. I think that's really helpful. Always acknowledging the emotions, but understanding that they come and go and we are not a victim or a slave to them. And so what are they telling us about the situation? If you're angry or sad or upset or hurt, they're giving us information, but we don't want to then call our boss in the midst of that and then have the conversation from that place because it's less fruitful.
It's interesting. I have a friend that acted on her emotions somewhat aggressively and had to go back the next day after she calmed down and just make all kinds of apologies.
Right. If we can avoid that, I mean, good for taking ownership and accountability. I love that. And if we don't have to do all that, maybe we can have a little bit better situation. But sometimes it's hard because you don't know, you don't have somebody to talk to, or you don't have the right trusted advisors in place.
Yeah, I'm reading this book called You Are the Mountain. It's kind of a coaching type of book. It's helping people to, really walk through and understand where they are and their beliefs and that sort of thing. And one of the things the author talked about, people have beliefs that maybe they shouldn't make so much money, or there are certain shoulds or should nots that people get wrapped up in. Have you seen that a lot? If so, how have you helped people work through that?
Yeah. So anytime anyone says should, it's a pause and let's kind of dissect that conversation. I should be reading more. Well, why? Do you actually want to read more? Why are we even saying that? So like, what's the belief that's fueling that? And do we really want it? Do you like to read? Do you enjoy reading? Do you want to, like, why are we saying that? Is there information you want to get? If you don't love reading, maybe you get it through a podcast, whatever it is, it's always looking at what the story is or what the belief is behind the should, because this goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning. It might not authentically be what you want. You might just believe it's supposed to be what you want to do or supposed to be what every entrepreneur does. Maybe that doesn't work for you. And then there's some fun trailblazing that can happen, or finding your right crew. Like when I stepped into coaching, originally I was doing really high performance coaching and looking for all of the Facebook ads and all the things that you were supposed to do. And I was like, high performance coaching at that level actually burned me out. And I don't want to do that with my clients. And I don't like Facebook ads. I'm not going to do that. But as I expressed what was authentic to me and started looking for different avenues, I was introduced to other people who coached in different ways where performance is still a part of it, but it allowed me to get more of this holistic coaching that I do now. And others who are like, oh, I don't do Facebook ads either, but I've tried this and that work. Oh, okay, great. Let me try this thing. So by taking out what you're supposed to do or what you should do and looking at what is authentic to you, you can still find ways to create success and build the business that you want. That's not exhausting. That steals a lot of energy. And it's like, why am I so tired every day? Or you're like forcing yourself to do something. It's like, why are we doing that? Let's find a better way for you. And acknowledging like how we work. Like if you are getting up super early and you really are a night person, maybe we need to look at something different for you. I don't know what that is, but acknowledging those types of things.
Yeah. Our company, I think before COVID, we had maybe 30 people or something like that. I enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the work that we did, but it was absolutely exhausting. And so I've cut my team back to like 2 people. We get in and we do what we do every day. And I feel so much better. I feel so much freer. And it's been a transition, like we talked about early on. But I think coming out on the other end of that, I feel more authentic. I don't feel like I'm an HR manager on top of that.
Yeah, it is hard. I mean, even I worked with a coach on that recently, like middle of last year.
Mm-hmm.
You giving yourself permission to say no to things, right? Like another entrepreneur is like, no, you need 30 people under you and you got to grow in this way. And it has to look like this. And if that works for that person, awesome. But there were things I noticed that it was hard for me to admit that I didn't want to do. And to understand that doing or not doing those things didn't automatically mean failure in my business or I didn't care enough or whatever, because owning your own business and wanting to be a solopreneur doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as wanting to be like an entrepreneur. I see people in my circle who love everything about that. And I'm like, oh, I just want to coach. So how do I maintain a business mostly just coaching, whereas they want to build something? It's just different. But it can be difficult to admit those things to yourself, or for somebody who's in corporate and they're managing a team and they're like, you know what, I'm ready to be a sole contributor, right? Individual contributor is the term I'm looking for. Well, what will my boss think? What will my colleagues think? Does it look like I got a demotion? Can I actually do that? We have all these stories and we get worried about it. If that's really what you want to do and you know that that's going to work for you, then let's address what's going on underneath the stories and then figure out how to get you there. But those permissions can be tricky. It can be hard to allow yourself to admit those things.
100%. That's a journey in and of itself.
It really is.
Some things we don't realize that we're doing to ourselves. And then just being able to say, hey, you know what? I can do this thing. I can, whatever that's going to be, being an entrepreneur. If you want to be that person that has the bigger organization, it doesn't mean that you have to. You can really believe in yourself and really push forward and make that happen despite what other people are saying or doing or whatever. I did some NLP training about 3-4 years ago now, and we'd worked through some of that. Have you ever worked with NLP?
I have. It's a lot of language and stories, a lot of stuff with clients, myself included. Like when I work with coaches, is how you're saying things, what you're saying, how you're languaging them, what you're telling yourself about the situation. It really does define most of our experiences. And our experiences also color how we're viewing those things. So if you did X one time a long time ago and it had a negative result, the idea of doing it again is going to be scary.
100%. Hey, we can use that gym analogy again for that.
Yeah. Got to get the strong muscles.
Got to get strong muscles. Got to keep trying. Got to keep going. This is awesome. I have a giveaway that you wanted to talk about.
So what I mentioned earlier is when I'm working with somebody new or potentially working with somebody new, I like to do a 30-minute call to get to know them and find out a little bit more about what they're up to, what their vision is, for them to get a feel for me. So wanted to let anybody know if they're on the call and they're thinking, I'm feeling a little stuck, or I feel like I might be putting up some obstacles on myself, and I'd love to talk about it and find out like what they might be and what types of things we could even work on in coaching. I have an offer for a 30-minute call so that we can kind of suss it out and see if it might make sense to do some coaching, or if there's somebody I can refer you to.
Awesome. And do you have anything you want to leave our audience with?
Yeah, I think when you're talking to yourself and you're saying those shoulds, really ask yourself, is it true that I should be doing this thing? Do I actually want to do it, right? Like, why am I saying this or believing it? What's fueling it underneath? Because doing a little bit of journaling or verbal processing or unpacking can help you get more to the root and really decide if it makes sense. Same thing with your to-do list. Like if you've got 100 things on there, how important are all of they? Like what's really important that you want to put your time into? So hopefully that helps.
I love it. Thank you, Alyssa. I really, really appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation.
Likewise.
So thank you so much for being on the show.
Audience,
thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of the Relentless Pursuit of Winning podcast. We will catch you next time.